Is the mic? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the session today. The topic of the session is the people model and cloud transformation. If you're wondering how this ties in with maybe some of the discussion you've already heard on Cloud Adoption Framework today, and some of the different pieces of cloud adoption and the perspectives related to it, this is the people perspective of Cloud Adoption Framework. So my name is Sanjay Asnani. I'm with AWS Professional Services, and with me I've also got my colleague here, Emil Lurch, who you've already actually watched a couple of presentations from. So the people aspect of transformation, right? This is probably the most significant obstacle that you will face as you undertake the journey to cloud. And customers over and over actually have told us the same thing, that they deal with people aspect a lot more than actually technology challenges and also process challenges. So today what we're going to talk about is how do you actually get over the hurdle of managing your people challenges, whether it's related to organizational structure, training and certifications, or figuring out the gaps in the skills of your staff. So we'll share with you some of the strategies and best practices, specifically 6 areas as part of people perspective that we advise customers to focus on. And we have learned over the years how effective those strategies have been. And to emphasize the point, you may wonder, is people kind of the biggest concern you would have? And if you believe the research from some of the analyst reports or even some of the top consulting firms like McKinsey's and Boston Consulting, you can see that getting people matter right is the most essential piece of any transformation. Because ultimately what you're trying to do is transforming the organization via people. It's the people who actually drive the decision making, the process changes, and also I would say technology decisions. And if you look at the quotes at the bottom, the couple of them from our recent customers, Harvard Business Publishing, where they made a direct quote that people, not the technology, was their biggest problem. So you can probably take a pretty good guess here that most people run into this very often. And sometimes it kind of feels like it's an abstract thing. You don't really have a good understanding of what aspects of people transformation you need to be thinking about, to what degree you need to be worried about, and how to even deal with those challenges. Similarly, University of Notre Dame, that has been going through the transformation, they had similar observation. The key to success was setting up a team. And notice the emphasis on the team. And they formed it in a dedicated area. They called it Cloud Central. So we'll touch upon that too in a second here. So just to kind of take you back to the genesis of Cloud Adoption Framework and where the people perspective actually came into existence. Over the years, we've been working with many customers in the enterprise space, commercial as well as public sector. And questions used to come in, they would come in very frequently where customers would ask us, what's going to be the business impact as I drive this transformation forward, or as I embrace cloud? How do I design the right foundation? What are some of the priorities? Am I ready to actually embark on this journey to cloud? What are some of the obstacles I'll face? What skills and capabilities would I need in terms of the right staffing, right people? How do I structure the cloud program appropriately so my transformation is successful? So as you can see, these were very relevant, pertinent questions. And what we did is, we actually took those questions and basically said, well, let's figure this out, right? This is definitely the whys and the whats and the hows. And if you look at the center of the screen, this framework as we call it, it's the who. Who's going to do it all, right? So it's no coincidence that people aspect really ties it all together. If you don't have the right people in place for the right roles, right responsibilities defined in the right org structure, chances are the transformation is actually not going to be very successful, or it's actually going to drag on. So perhaps there is going to be a time cost associated with it. And as you may have also read some statistics online, typically people say 60 to 70% of all transformations don't actually succeed. So you may want to actually think about this really hard and pay attention to that. So we kind of took all those questions and the whys and hows and what, and we figured we're just going to name these perspectives. And we actually have white paper published on Cloud Adoption Framework. If you've not seen that, I would highly encourage you to look it up, search on the web, And for each perspective also, we've got a very detailed white paper articulating the do's and the don'ts, what are some of the considerations, and how to actually drive your transformation leveraging this framework. And this framework really allows you to plan and kind of create the support for the cloud environment, and also serves as the guidance, right? So we've got strategies and best practices that we share in those papers for establishing, developing, and running your cloud environment, as well as kind of using this as a structure to align your business and IT to work together. So as you can see, people aspect is what we're talking about. And some of you may or may not have seen this slide. This is really an interesting framework that we also put together. We call it Cloud Adoption Maturity Model. Typically, you'll notice that your organization will fall into one of these 4 stages. Chances are most of you can see yourselves in these 4 stages. Typically, on the left-hand side, when you actually take your first steps to your cloud journey, you're in the exploration stage. You're still not sure whether you want to go there at what speed. Do you have the right amount even of data? Do you even understand if this is the right the vendor you're choosing? So you're kind of in that proof of concept stage. You're looking for some quick wins. You're trying to maybe build consensus throughout your organization. Maybe you've got a bunch of scattered accounts, right? People swiping P cards. So maybe there is no governance established yet, or even you have thought about the governance as it relates to cloud. And then you quickly move into, if everything pans out in phase 1, you're actually kind of going into the alignment stage. That's where things are starting to come together. Your cloud strategy is probably being more, getting more formalized. You're kind of doing a deeper dive on the amount of applications you have and what's going to move perhaps, what's going to be in scope and what's not. And maybe at that step, you're also thinking about formalizing some enterprise agreements with the cloud vendors, from AWS, for example. And you'll notice people model is really a key theme there. You want to make sure that you have your people strategy figured out, different aspects, the challenges that you're anticipating, and also building a very robust sort of people strategy around how you're going to drive through the next 2 stages, because implementation is where a lot of the hands on the keyboard action is happening, right? This is where you're actually doing major migrations. You're perhaps even creating some new workloads that are very cloud native, and you really need to make sure that you've got the right teams, with the right skill set to be able to handle that. And the last but not least is optimization. And as one of my colleagues calls it, even though it may seem like it's the last stage, as in, woohoo, I've migrated everything to cloud, that's really where the action starts, right? That's where you've got now AWS running in your environment, and you really need to pay a lot of attention to how do I optimize, right? This is where you leverage the full power of cloud in terms of cost efficiencies, performance efficiencies, and making sure the environment that you're in now is successful. So with that, I kind of wanted to kick this off with our customer here, Allison Robinson. She is the Deputy CIO and Assistant Vice President of University of Maryland, College Park. And I would ask her to kind of talk about, first introduce herself, and also tell us about the challenges as she's actually undergoing this transformation as we speak right now. Allison, please.
Good afternoon. So we started in earnest last July 1st. We announced a reorganization of our group. Now, understand, University of Maryland has about 37,000 students. There's a little over 25,000 undergrad, a little under 10,000 graduate. We have 250 programs, 9,000 faculty and staff. There's 245 buildings. There's 95,000 data network jacks, 6,000 wireless access points. I found an interesting stat. We have 11 million feet of single mode fiber and 14 million feet of copper. It's a big place, and there's a lot of demand. And there's more IT than just the division of ITs that I'm with. So there's a lot of people inherently interested in what we're doing with the cloud. And so we had to not only work with our staff on what this change would be, but for campus too, and researchers. There's $500 million of research annually that come into the campus. And we can't take any risk that's going to jeopardize our research portfolio. So it's really important that although I'm in charge of enterprise engineering, and you might think I might be in one of the more technical sessions, really people was one of the things getting our own convinced that this is something that we need to do, as well as assuring campus what we'd be doing and what it would mean to them. When our CIO started, it'll be 2 years this July that Eric's been there, he came into an organization that looked like this. From a perspective, the ITIL service strategy, service design, service operations, or plan, build, run, often called, each one of these groups were major units in the division of IT, and each one of them was performing this task. So many campus would come to us for service, and they would have better or worse luck depending on how well they knew people in each one of those organizations and the relationship. So they're coming to us to order a service, to get help with a service that they already are using, or they want a new service, and they'd have to negotiate any one of those three anywhere within those blocks. And I actually scaled it to see most people were taking their time and working in the area of operations. Then building was a little bit more, and then plan by far was, you're in a very reactive mode this way. So we actually went through the process of people self-identifying the tasks they do, and the percentage of time they spend on that task, and would they identify that task to be more planning, more engineering, or more operations. And we took everybody in the division, 250 people, and we did the math, and we figured out what people were doing and where they're spending their time so that we could restructure into something that looked more like this. So that we had, as best as we could estimate, the right people with the right skill sets and the right numbers in each focus of the organization. And so now the front door to IT services is our ServiceNow project, and people order from us there. This looks very, very familiar to what the DevOps that Amazon uses in how they do their work. And very much this people aspect around it, one of our central things is to be secure, stable, and modern environment. We had to look at our people, process, and tools to do that. And AWS was key to these initiatives. As a matter of fact, our directive is to close down our data centers. That if we can't have it in the cloud, specifically Amazon Web Services is where we're looking to partner to be able to have our data center functionality. We have redundant ISP internet connection, a redundant Internet 2 connection, and a redundant direct connect to AWS. We are scaling up for our data center of the future to be with Amazon Web Services. So we really had to focus on being able to support our people in being prepared to work in the AWS environment going forward. And so we do have an engineering, our platforms group is almost, a fair number of them are almost singularly focused on preparing the Amazon Web Services environment. We're engaged with Amazon right now in professional services to assist us in this transformation because we know it's going to play a key to our future, and there's just some things you don't get to go back and do again. There's some mistakes I've already made, and I really don't want to do them again in this new environment. So it's been great partnering with Amazon. And I have to say, you know, give me a minute to sound a little academic here. There's a brain bias, right? The news sells because it's negative. That's what gets paid attention to. So when we announced a reorg, it wasn't, you know, people didn't run and hug me because, great, this is a new opportunity to learn technology. I had gurus that were like that, and they really did lead the charge, and I let them be out in front and teach others. But brain bias, they're trying to get rid of us. They're trying to fire us. We have 200 student employees. That's a big program that we've just been doing over the last year. They're hiring students to fire us. We did run into that. I won't kid you that there was that concern, and we got a lot of feedback that way. But we just kept working, and we said, if you want to be here and you want to learn, we'll train you, and you've got a job. You can't interview people to find, you can't ask the right interview question to find those people. So we truly just kept plugging away and kept people involved and kept communication going along. And we do have our AWS environment now. We have Direct Connect. We have an app running there. I've actually had to put the brakes on my staff so that we can finish our work and make sure we're doing the governance and costing and people correctly on the environment. There's not perfect, but there's things we do have to get right. So we are actively engaged in that right now, and a year later, after our reorg was announced of July 1, it's a completely different place, and people are accepting this is what we need to do. We've come a long way when I stop to think about it, but it's work to get there.
Thank you, Allison. So let's take the mystery out of what those 6 components are that we talked about. And I can tell you from this experience, the way you manage the people model is going to be the single most thing that you'll have to get it right, because that can either make or break your transformation. And the 6 components that we're going to talk about is, first is organizational structure. As Allison also pointed out, you really want to make sure you get the organizational structure right. And we'll talk about that, what's kind of one of the recommended strategy, and in fact, you've heard about that before too in the governance session. Getting roles and job descriptions as accurately defined as possible to make sure that the people are comfortable with the new roles they're taking on, which again is going to kind of talk about, speak to the skills and competencies you need to have, developed. And also then as a result, you also need to be looking at what sort of training plan, training readiness of your people you need to be thinking about. So you can plan for the future, because this transformation most likely is going to occur, over 1 to maybe 3 years period of time, but hopefully you're going to be in this for much longer duration. So you need to be thinking about long-term impact of the people in terms of how you train them and how you even get them ready for certification. Sometimes that could be a great motivator for folks to maybe stick around, do bigger things and better things because they're excited about cloud. Managed staffing, and I already kind of talked about it. So managed staffing is one of the key elements. How do you actually make sure you're motivating the people for the right positions? For example, even Allison mentioned, right? You don't really have to give up what you're doing. Just be thinking about what you're going to do next. There is help available. And as maybe the organizational leader, you need to be thinking about short-term plan, intermediate plans, and also long-term plan. Where are you going to get the talent from? How are you going to make sure that the talent is ready to operate the environment when maybe a year or 2 down the road, you're fully migrated onto AWS. And I cannot emphasize organizational change management. This I know is a thing that gets thrown around quite a bit, but you really want to make sure that this is, getting the organizational change management is done right. You want to make sure that the communication is happening at all levels, the common vision is being built with the right people, right teams. Obviously, there's going to be challenges. We all know that humans don't take to change very well. So some of the things actually have to be, done in a way that actually can be embraced by the people and who can actually help you move this transformation forward. So related to organizational structure, the most effective strategy that we have seen that helps customers succeed at transformations is setting up a center of excellence. You've heard this referred to before. There are different flavors. People call it center of competence or maybe just a cloud project team. And the idea really is that it's a core, small, focused team that is totally responsible for building competencies, developing cloud standards. If it's template, maybe that's really what their task is. They're also actually looked upon as change agents. They're also very enthusiastic people. In fact, we recommend that be a part of a qualification criteria when you're recruiting members for that team. And you can think of this as perhaps even a virtual team initially, maybe not full-time dedicated staff, but ultimately you want to think about people whose roles and responsibilities match very close to what the COE team is going to be doing. And ultimately you want to pick the right people who can actually go and kind of spread the enthusiasm, right, throughout the organization. We have seen flavors of, this team being set up very small. 7 to 10 people is generally what we recommend typically to start with. But I do recall that University of Notre Dame has got a 25, people team out of the 350 that are in the IT organization. So, use whatever works from your organization's perspective. And they also tried something which has been very successful, is rotating people from business units in and out of the COE. So that way, you have the advantage of kind of doing knowledge proliferation through the change agents from the business units as well. Bring them on to the COE, get them trained up, get them also enthusiastic and energized, and they can go back and carry the message forward to their business units. And also become maybe a bridge to you eventually, promoting some of the best practices through them. And obviously, you're going to have to make sure you pick the right people who would be successful in that role. This is one of the sample org structures you could potentially be thinking about, with the leadership at the top, Chief Cloud Officer, different titles that we have heard, CTO. It could also be a CIO in that position. who make sure that there is effective leadership at the top, because we all know that these initiatives have a high degree of possibility of failure if the right executive sponsor is not driving it. So we highly recommend that it's driven by a senior executive leader. And at the other levels, you've got cloud infrastructure lead, you have got DevOps and automation, cloud architecture lead, and security risk and compliance lead. And this also feeds into the discussion that Emil is going to have, that this is actually sort of the blueprint of the DevOps or the DevSecOps team as well, right? Where you're kind of breaking down the barriers to communication, and you're making sure that people from all domains are reflected in this team as well, right? Second area you want to focus on is skills and competencies. You want to make sure you have sort of an assessment of where your organization is right now. Start with perhaps a baseline. What are some of the skills you currently have? Where do people find the most amount of, spend the most amount of time right now? And then start lining those up against the organizational goals. So for example, maybe cloud adoption, the reason you're pursuing it is that you want to manage your cost effectively and efficiently. You want to be able to trace every element of where an EC2 instance is being spun up, or how much you're spending on storage. So if that's your primary objective, figure out what capabilities your organization is going to need. Do you currently have those capabilities, or maybe you don't? If you don't, then you can line up some of the activities that I'm going to talk about later. But once you've got the capabilities figured out, maybe for example, being able to track or manage the cost effectively, well, you need to figure out the capabilities you need, right? The capability could be that the person or whoever is in charge needs to be comfortable with tracking the cost, utilizing the resources in cloud platform. And then you need to be thinking about the activities. What is this role or the person going to be doing from the activities perspective? Well, they need to be able to go and architect the environment appropriately. They need to be coming up with the right tagging strategy. Perhaps this person also needs to work with finance department to ensure that the right tags actually get assigned to the right resources. And then you think about the skills you need. Okay, you've already mapped out organizational goals, the capabilities, and the activities, and now you need to go and get the right person with the right skills. So perhaps this is where you're going to be thinking about, I need to have this level and this amount of training for my team that's going to be driving this. One of the methods you can also use is build a RACI plan. This is kind of a resource management function where you assign roles and responsibilities and map those to the tasks. And RACI stands for who's going to be responsible, who's going to be accountable, perhaps who's going to be consulted on some of the actions you see on the left-hand side. And the last one is who's going to be perhaps just informed. And you can build this all the way from CIO, CTO level, down to your tactical folks who are actually building out templates, running kind of formation, doing infrastructure as a code, maybe writing some automation, scripts. And it just kind of clarifies also to people, because this is also an important part of organizational change management, that folks can start to see what the roles and responsibilities will be as they're pursuing this, perhaps in the current state, but also in the transition state. Because a lot of times, there are some doubts as to, well, what's going to happen when I'm running in the state where I've got on-prem environment, but at the same time, I'm also running, AWS environment. And the far right shows what's the future state going to look like. And that then could lead to building an effective training and certification plan. So we basically take the roles and the activities, and you see the kind of across the top and the RACI chart, and start to map out, based on the roles, what sort of training needs these folks could have. And then you can ultimately even take it down to a level whether the needs is going to be satisfied by perhaps just doing some sort of online training, or depending on the culture of your staff and where they are in their learning process, perhaps instructor-led, on-site trainings. So there are lots of options available for you to explore. And AWS Professional Services actually offers assistance in this as well. We have what we call Skills Assessment Accelerator, which basically helps you navigate the path to get to assessing the skills. Do you have the right capability? Do you have the right training plan? So that we can actually come in and help you accelerate that process, so you won't have to struggle or kind of put it all together yourself. And the objective really is that, we're going to ultimately help you build, this perhaps cloud center of excellence, and ultimately this can feed into your adoption roadmap, because as we talked about before. Now, managed staffing, I keep going back to this. This is going to be one of the key things you would really have to get right. And one of the confusions that I see with the customers that I talk to is some of the folks are not clear what's going to be their level of responsibility in terms of the tasks they currently do, whether those go up, go down in scope, or perhaps they remain the same. And in some cases, you may also actually want to take a, sort of a deeper look and say, maybe some of the tasks actually will be obsolete going forward. For example, if you've got a person dedicated to managing storage, right, that worries about storage planning, capacity planning, going and getting, bids from the vendors, acquiring new storage, well, chances are that function is no longer going to be that important anymore, that it's going to be a dedicated function. Well, that's not to say that person's not needed anymore, right? That skill set is still needed. Chances are that person would have to be repurposed for doing broader things in AWS, because there's definitely more things that are going to happen. And chances are that person is going to do more value-added tasks in AWS. So building some sort of a table like this or some sort of analysis helps, again, people see what the transformation is like and how it's going to impact them directly. And last but not least, organizational change management. As Allison actually touched on it, and this is typical for any transformation. I would not say that it's just related to IT. Even though with respect to cloud, what we're talking about here, it kind of turns everything that we know about IT on its head, right? So this touches on the way you acquire IT, the way you do business, the way you procure things. There's lots of things that cloud actually changes from people perspective, as well as from technology perspective, as well as from process perspective. So typically you'll come across this, so don't be alarmed if initially people express a lot of shock, right? Well, why is this happening? I don't like to change because I'm set in kind of my ways of doing things. And then obviously folks go through maybe the denial stage. Well, this is not happening, or this is going to go back when the new leader comes back. You hear lots of variations of that as well. And that's when we recommend that the leaders at the top need to really make sure that the alignment exists in the organization. That your business strategy, your IT strategy, what you're looking to accomplish with cloud adoption, that the goals are clear. Is it more around you want to bring more agility to the organization, or is it more cost saving because maybe you're spending 80% of your money on maintaining old assets and infrastructure? So once those things are clear, still you're going to see some people who are still frustrated. They're still not along for the ride. They're still concerned, what's going to happen to me? How is it going to impact my job? Do I still have a place in the new organization? Or how do I transform myself? Do I have even time to go and do new training classes? And that's when you actually want to maximize the communication with the audience. We typically see this. And some of the leaders who actually don't kind of over-communicate sometimes have results that are not aligned with their expectations. Slowly, you're going to start to notice, though, that people actually have reached that point, and transformation has reached that point where message is making sense. Folks have maybe had a chance to experiment with the new technology, and chances are they've actually seen the great results already. And that's when you start to see this kind of coalition building, right, of people maybe getting infected through kind of the good outcomes of the COE as well, right? These folks who are actually building out standards, going out there in the organizational community, doing maybe some brown bag sessions around what's going on, how's this new technology going to help them. And people really get motivated when they see time savings, when they see cost savings, when they also see the positive impact of cloud, for example, on their job descriptions. In fact, one of the examples I heard last year, one of the customers was pushing back, or one of the customers was actually seeing some pushback from the staff saying, well, I just want to retain my old titles. What's wrong with the old title, right? Why do we need to go to cloud? So we recommended just go out and do a search. If you just do a search on what's the salary commanded by a person whose title is sysadmin, and then go and do the same search, again with the cloud in front of it, chances are the person can now get 20 or 30% more in the marketplace. So that became sort of an instant motivator for some of the internal staff to say, yeah, this could be a great thing for me, my resume, my profile down the road, and there's actually incentive for me now also as a person to be part of this transformation. And we hope, right, at the end of it, you come out a winner where you're actually realizing success from this transformation. You've got more control of where the organization's going, and you realize the benefits of transformation. So with that, I want to bring Emil to stage and talk about DevOps, some of the stuff you may have already seen. But this is kind of the new emerging professional movement going on in the industry, squarely centered around how you organize your team, because this is where the collaboration happens, the communication barriers come down, and folks from development, operations, IT, and security are working together. So with that, I'll turn it over to Emil.
Thank you. So to talk about DevSecOps and DevOps in terms of people and process, I think it's first worth baselining on exactly what is DevSecOps. And in order to do that, I want to take everybody through the software development lifecycle. As we try to build our software in order to deliver it to customers, we first have the developers build the software. Then we have somebody, either developers, QA, customers, combination of all three, going through and testing the software. And then we oftentimes have operations put that software into production. After the software is in production, we gather feedback from customers. We try to find out how they're using the software. We might be doing measurements on the servers to find out how they're using the software and where we can improve. And we do that through various monitoring techniques. With all that feedback, along with our own organization's interests in terms of how and where we want the software to go, we then plan for the next cycle. And this iterates over and over again. DevSecOps, shortly stated, is anything that will speed up this life cycle. How do we produce incremental value faster for our customers? By aligning development, security, and operations, we can all understand each other's challenges and work together better to breed better and better efficiencies out of the people and process in our organizations. Along with people and process, there's obviously a technological component. Many people talk about DevOps or DevSecOps as automate everything. Well, that's part of it. That's absolutely speaking to the technology bubble as pictured on this slide. But there's also a huge component of people and process. Fundamentally, DevSecOps is about understanding each other's challenges and working together, getting collaboration between disparate functions. So we need people and process along with technology in order to really succeed in DevOps and DevSecOps. Along with the cloud and transformation into the cloud, moving from a traditional model to a DevSecOps model is a cultural paradigm shift. We're trying to cross-train skills so that we can gain empathy for other disciplines inside the organization. And we're trying to collaborate above all between the various skills that we have in our organization in order to understand and move faster as an organization. So the question everyone should really ask is my application driving business value based on the state it is in now? One question that I get a lot is DevSecOps and Agile. Agile is a methodology. DevSecOps is a movement to try to encourage collaboration between groups. These two things seem to be very, very closely aligned. And the answer is yes, it is very closely aligned. But then the next question becomes, well, do I have to do both together, or can I implement these individually? DevSecOps, as I mentioned, is about making this software development lifecycle more efficient, getting incremental value faster to our customers in a sustained manner. Agile emphasizes individuals and interactions over processes and tools, the goal being to get higher quality software. Working software over spending time doing reams and reams of documentation. Again, we're focused on the software and the software quality. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Again, we're removing barriers, trying to make higher quality software. And responding to change over following a plan. So again, we're not going to just go down a path. We're going to listen and get that feedback and make that turn around the cycle faster. So the two are closely aligned. In fact, DevOps was actually born out of the Agile movement to try to emphasize how we can make the software development lifecycle faster, while Agile focused on the quality aspects of our software. So, like chocolate and peanut butter, they can be eaten either way, but when they're put together, they're even better. So there's a number of DevSecOps levers that we can pull on. There's obviously the automate everything camp, right? And that is on the technical side. There's a lot of levers we can pull on, right? We want to automate everything that we can in order to, again, make that turn around the software development loop faster. However, on the people and process side, there's a number of things that we can do as well. A lot of organizations don't want to go as far as a full reorganization into a cross-discipline team, but there's other things that you can do without going to the reorganization step. You can create virtual teams without reorganizing from a management structure perspective. You can make simple steps like documenting release processes and testing processes. Anything that will make these turns around the loop faster and faster. Cross-discipline training is going to breed empathy between the different disciplines and skill sets that you have in your organization. People will learn, developers will learn from security and learn from operations. Security will learn how developers are motivated and what it is that they're trying to accomplish, as well as the operational challenges that the operations team faces. Operations will learn what the developers are facing and what security needs. Cross-discipline social events, just getting everybody into a room is going to, again, get people talking, break down barriers to communication, encourage empathy, and breed efficiency. And then finally, rotation programs. So again, creating empathy by moving people from one discipline to another so that they can learn about each other's jobs and what it is that is important to that section of the organization. So DevSecOps is really coming back to people and process all the time. As much as we can understand each other's challenges, the organization as a whole is going to be more and more efficient. Coming back to communication, Melvin Conway in 1967 noted that when he looked out on the industry, any organization that designs a system is going to produce a design whose structure is roughly a copy of the organization's communication structure. I'll point out that when you look at this quote, he's not talking about organization, he's talking about communication. As much as we can communicate across disciplines, we're going to break down those barriers to communication and we'll produce better system designs as well. Looking at this and thinking about the communication structure and consciously reorganizing the communication structure, Johnny Leroy and Matt Simmons in 2010 came up with the inverse Conway maneuver. And this is, again, break down silos between the different parts of the organization. And that will help unleash the constraints on the team's ability to collaborate effectively. At Amazon and Amazon Web Services, we have gone the reorganization route. So this involves 2 pizza teams. We do small teams that can be fed with no more than 2 pizzas. And these teams are accountable for everything within their service. They also have the authority to make decisions for customers within their service. They have aligned incentives. The whole team is pulling together to move this service forward and help our customers. And they have full ownership. So within AWS, I've been talking about people and process perspectives, making sure that people are communicating, they're working across discipline. The 2 pizza teams I talked about have a responsibility for development, operations, security, everything related to that service. They're going to be monitoring and getting feedback for that service and do their own planning. These are all people and process items, but we also have a number of services throughout our offerings that help enable DevSecOps. So you can see a list of them. I'm not going to go through them here. But one of the points that I want to make here is that we do have a vast array of services that can help out with DevSecOps planning. How you use these services, the technology that you bring to bear within your organization really is organization dependent and requires a focus on the people and process first, and then bring the technology, the appropriate technology, to your organization. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Sanjay. I think there's some final words.
Yeah, thanks. And Emil wasn't kidding when he said 2 pizzas. No, sometimes we order 3 as well. So what are the takeaways from this session, right? Let's talk about just kind of summarizing this presentation into these 5 bullet points. Cloud transformation really is as much about people as it's about technology and process. Most people, I think, get the technology part really right, and AWS has really been doing a great job of that as well for the last 10 years. We've got 70+ services, we've got over 1 million customers in 190 countries, so we can pretty much handle every imaginable use case that you can think of. It's the people aspect which is sometimes very confusing because your organization's culture, where it's coming from and how deeply rooted in some of the ways you do things, could pose some challenges, and that's where you can use some of these strategies. Don't be afraid to make appropriate changes to your organization. Whether it's reorganizing the teams a little bit differently, whether it's the DevSecOps kind of principle approach that Emil talked about. But ultimately, the goal is that the amount of collaboration and the communication has to increase to the point where there is no friction between teams being able to work collaboratively and produce a product that's free of errors, and you've got a resilient infrastructure, and you're not actually thinking about, well, I'm going to throw it over the wall and somebody's actually going to go take care of it. One team takes care of it all, right? So it kind of speeds up the process, and as you deploy and migrate more application, the process becomes even more streamlined. Do figure out the gaps in the skills, gaps in the skill set your organization has. It's one of the key exercises that you can probably even do now as you're even thinking about the transformation, even if you're not in one of the 4 stages that we talked about. Start taking a look at what sort of people you have, what sort of skill sets you have. Maybe start kind of figuring that piece out right now. And the more you know about your people now, the more you can actually help them visualize the future and also plan your target state appropriately. If you're going to feel confident that you've got the right people, right level of motivation, and also maybe figure out some sort of a training plan ahead of time, the better off your transformation, and it's basically going to mitigate some of the risk that we see that companies running into. And definitely think about creating smaller cross-discipline team, leverage the concept of DevOps, DevSecOps. Now we're also hearing DevSec FinOps. So make sure that all these folks are actually part of a very small, nimble team that you can ideally, pretty much count on like, single hand or perhaps, 2 hands, right? And this is going to make sure that your transformation is efficient and, the collaboration is really happening at the level you really need. And last but not least, hopefully this all kind of takes you to the level where you're able to go very fast and not stuck in a rut where you're kind of wondering what to do next. So with that, we've got about 2 minutes. Please do fill out your surveys as well, but we've got time for Q&A. We would love to take maybe a question or 2, and if you have a question for Allison, she would be happy to answer as well.
I will.
Yes.
I wondered how much actual software development your team is doing at university, and then if not so much, and it's just cost, then how much of the DevOps and DevSecOps applies?
No, we have a lot of software development. And so when we reorganized into enterprise engineering, I have software development, platforms, and network all together because all of that's converging to software defined. So we want them working in a DevOps just from the start. We have quite a bit of it.
Yes.
How have your customers reacted to the change in IT?
So that's a great question because they used to know Bob or Sue, and I'd call them and I'd get what I want, and all of a sudden, well, what do they do now, and who do I call and put in a ticket? And that's really not popular with some people. So we've had to work through that. But then we've also had the other situation where we've looked for Bob or Sue, and Sue had actually quit, and Bob was out with heart surgery, and they almost had a faculty senate election that didn't occur because they didn't enter a ticket. So we try and use those situations to show people that this is really the process we need you to do to give you the best result.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you for your time, folks. Appreciate you coming here. Have a great rest of the summer. Amit.